Welcome, everyone. My name is Nancy Powell, and I am a member of West Newbury WOW Native. That is quite a mouthful to say, so we also call ourselves WN2. WN2 is a group of residents passionate about promoting native plants, pollinator, wildlife-friendly gardening, and controlling invasive plants. We believe preservation of natural biodiversity
Come
is
on.
best done one yard at a time and work to educate and empower every gardener and landowner to preserve and restore native habitat. We want to thank West Newbury Library for co-sponsoring this event tonight. Our guest speaker is Nate Whitmer, who will be talking about invasive plants today. This is a topic that is closely aligned to the mission of WN2. It was actually a joint presentation that Carol and I gave on invasive plant ID and control that got so much enthusiastic response and engagement that we decided we had to form a community group to harvest that energy. So 5 years later, our mission has expanded into a lot of other nature-based topics, and we've also spun off into several other community groups that have formed in neighboring towns. We are very excited to have Nate speak tonight. And from the number of people joining and the number that register, we see that you are too. Before I ask Carol to introduce Nate, there's a couple of housekeeping items I want to go over. Nate has graciously allowed us to record tonight's presentation. So the recording will be available in a couple of days at our website, our YouTube channel, and the library's website. While Nate is presenting, we ask that you mute yourself and turn off your cameras. We will have a question and answer session after the presentation. If you think of any questions while Nate is talking, please type them into the chat box. Kara and I will be monitoring that. And if it's a question that is related to what he's speaking about that needs clarification, we will kind of ask that of Nate. Otherwise, we'll wait till the end of the presentation to have a question and answer session. Are there any questions from our audience? Okay, if we don't, I'm going to turn it over to Carol to introduce Nate.
Thanks so much, Nancy, and what a pleasure it is to introduce Nate. I've recently just talked with Nate. I mean, we've been communicating for quite a long time on this program, but what I've learned about Nate and is he is very passionate. He's a passionate native plant advocate and also an invasive plant removal specialist. He's been a landscaper. He's been in the business for over 25 years. But what I read about Nate and talked to him about is how closely he started observing what he was being asked to plant. He also looked at what country were these plants? What was the origin of these plants? And so I loved that Nate started collecting the tags from the plants. He'd go home, he'd start looking them up. What's really interesting is Massachusetts started an invasive plant advisory group that had been working for years. They released their first formal prohibited list back in 2006. Nate saw that list and realized that many of the plants that were being put in were these non-native, and what we know now, many are invasive plants. Nate spent the last 2 decades learning about the threats from non-native invasive plants, learning and using the best methods to remove them, as well as promoting native plants which better support a healthy ecosystem. Nate also is very passionate, and I was just as we were chatting, I expect you were probably out on snowshoes, and he said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I was." So that's Nate. Welcome. We're so excited you're here to share your passion and your knowledge and really how all of us can start tackling those invasives in our own yard and in our communities. Welcome, Nate.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Carol, and certainly thank you to the West Newbury Library for excuse me, for hosting this, coordinating it through Zoom. And before I get going with the presentation, I also want to proactively thank all of you who have taken time out of your busy schedules. I know everyone's busy. We have busy lives, we have busy weeks, busy evenings, but I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join this call to learn. And I hope that this will be an educational and engaging and informative experience with you. We're, well over 100 something participants on this call, and I keep seeing more and more people pinging that they're at it, waiting in the waiting room. And this is just awesome that there's, over 100 people, maybe closer to 200, I'm not sure, just wanting to learn about this. So thank you. Let's get talking about plants. Thank you, Carol, for that introduction. Just a little bit more about me. So I'm Nate Whitmer. I am Massachusetts born and raised. I've lived here in Massachusetts for pretty much my whole life. I am an HR guy by profession. I've got the official title is Senior Global Compensation Manager, and I work full time. That's my full time day job. I work for an awesome life sciences company, Charles River Labs, that's really trying to come up with ways and treatments and cures for diseases that are afflicting humans across the globe. So, really happy to be part of that company. Additionally, I've worked as a landscaper, as Carol mentioned, for over 2 decades. I actually started working summers as a landscaper in high school and college. And then at some point after college and starting my professional career, I kind of got hooked up with my buddy's landscaping crew. And, every Saturday from April to November, I am out doing landscaping as a laborer there. And I enjoy it. Some people go to pay to go get physically active. I get paid to be physically active on the weekend. So it's really fun. It's a fun little thing. I've always had an interest in plants, even as a kid growing up in my tiny postage stamp quarter-acre lot in Burlington, Massachusetts. I remember walking around the yard and just observing plants and noticing, hey, we've got like 3 different pine trees growing in our yard, and just trying to observe and notice, and suddenly starting to notice, hey, there's a couple different unique bugs on these plants, but they don't hang out on those plants. And through being a landscaper and asking questions and being curious, I became a native plant advocate and invasive plant removal specialist, if you want to call me that. So with that, let's get into what the agenda is. First, we're going to talk about what makes a plant good or bad, invasive plant definition and history, why it matters, and what you can do. So to start off with, what makes a plant good or bad? And this was a question I had 20 something years ago. The very first summer I started landscaping, I was working for a company, a property management company down in Woburn. I could take it to the exact address where this kind of, first epiphany moment happened. But, we had torn up the parking lot that was adjacent to this building, filled it in with dirt, and then we filled in that space with all kinds of plants. And I was like, this is amazing. We are doing great things for the earth. We have taken what was a barren parking lot and we have turned it into a green space. What could be better? And I remember asking the crew leader as we were planting, I said, hey, tell me, why'd we pick these plants? What's so special about putting these plants here? And he's like, I don't know. They just grow better here. Don't ask questions. Well, that wasn't good enough for Nate. So what I did at the end of that shift there, at the end of that job, is I actually went around to each of the pots and pulled each of the individual tags off, put them in my pocket. And of course, this being 2000, the day and age before cell phones and internet in hand, I went home, got on my dial-up or DSL or whatever internet we had at the time, and started looking up, ooh, Euonymus alatus, burning bush, native to Japan. Oh, how cool is that? Biodiversity. We took a plant from Japan and plopped it in the ground here in New England. Well, this is awesome. Go to the next one. Common barberry, Berberis thunbergi, native to Japan. Well, 2 for 2. What are the odds? Go to the next one. Rosa rugosa, commonly found across New England, but actually native to Japan, Korea, and northern China. The next one was pretty self-explanatory, Japanese golden mop cypress, and so on with every single one of these plants. And I was like, wait, that was my first question. Why did we plant all Japanese plants here or European plants? Surely there's got to be North American plants that would grow and do just fine here. And so that was my very first question. And I didn't think much about it until, like Carol said, Massachusetts released its banned invasive plant list. And suddenly I was like, what? Banned plants? All of these plants, Norway maple, burning bush, everything that we've been planting is now on this list. What's going on? Why are these plants good? Why are they bad? And so that's the question I'm going to answer tonight and hopefully help you learn and start thinking a little differently about plants. Now, I know we have people on this call from all across the continent, from Canada, at least down to North Carolina. There may be even some down into Florida and out west to Texas and California. That is awesome. Now, the plant pictures and references will probably be mostly North American, Northeast, kind of New England region, but the same principle will apply no matter where you are in the North American continent. So let's look at three plants that most people in the Northeast here and along the Eastern Seaboard will commonly find in their yards, anywhere from, say, North Carolina all the way up into Canada. And these are three plants that you may have all three, one, two, or all three in your yard. The first, poison ivy. Everyone knows that one. Oh yeah, that's the three leaves. I touch that and I get a rash. It's a bad, I get a rash just looking at it. It's bad, bad. So humans unequivocally agree. Okay, yeah, poison ivy, bad plant. Then we move on to Virginia creeper. And people are starting to think, oh, you know what? I've seen those leaves and they kind of grow right next to poison ivy. So they're probably guilty by association. And I hear that they're a vine, and vines are bad for trees, so it's probably a bad one. And then you go to glossy buckthorn, and people are like, hey, you know what? I've actually seen that plant. It hangs out in the corners of my yard underneath the trees and kind of right along the edge. It's a nice kind of barrier between my yard and my neighbor's yard where no one knows where the true lot line is, but it kind of takes up that space. And, doesn't bother me, doesn't make me itch, and it's got these berries that the birds like, and it doesn't kind of strangle trees. So it's got to be a good one. Now, one thing I want you to remember as we go through is regardless of whether humans think good, probably good, or bad, probably bad, or good, there's always something out there that eats a plant or eats something that eats a plant. And believe it or not, there is actually something that specifically and only eats poison ivy. And that's how it is with most plants. There is some creature in whatever corner of the world this plant originated, and that creature in that same corner of the world eats that plant and pretty much only that plant. And without that plant, it dies off. So the poison ivy leaf miner moth, it loves poison ivy. According to it, poison ivy is a good plant because without it, it can't survive. Most caterpillar larvae of plant-eating species of insects can only eat one specific type of plant because their stomachs, their bodies are adapted to the toxins or the chemicals or the composition that's in those plants. In some cases, they even have specific mouth parts that can only access one type of flower or one type of leaf. And so then when they grow into adults, they become pollinating moths that fly flower to flower, pollinating this flower, turning it into seeds, and so on to produce more plants for the next generation. So according to poison ivy leaf miner moth, poison ivy is good. Virginia creeper, that is actually the sole food source. That and fox scrape are the sole food source for the eight-spotted forester moth. Remember this picture here because we are going to talk about this cute little caterpillar here a little later on in the presentation. And then we get into glossy buckthorn, and sure enough, there is a creature in the world, the brimstone butterfly caterpillar, that only eats glossy buckthorn and its close cousin, common buckthorn. Without those plants, this caterpillar and the beautiful butterfly that it produces would die off. Now, regardless of what humans think, bad, probably bad and good, and insects, good, good, and good, the ultimate determinant or veto card, much like in real estate, is location, location, location. And so, as I hinted at earlier, we need to look at in what specific corner of the world did this plant originate. And if it's still there, then it by default is a good plant. So, poison ivy, get ready for this, brace yourselves. It is native to North America, so by default, it is a good plant. Regardless of how irritating or annoying it is to humans, it is a good plant. I'll try to interject some fun little facts here or there. As I understand it, poison ivy across the world, this green globe that we're spinning on, blue globe, whatever you want to call it, there are only two creatures, as I understand it, that are allergic to poison ivy, and that is humans and hamsters for whatever strange reason. Other creatures can walk by it, not get a rash. They eat it. I've seen deer and rabbit eat it. It's just unfortunate they don't seem to eat more of it. But anyhow, poison ivy is native to North America by default is a good plant. Virginia creeper as well is native to North America and again by default is a good plant. Glossy buckthorn, on the other hand, is non-native and is invasive and is on many, many states banned plant lists. And you're like, Nate, you said there's a creature that depends on it. What about this glossy buckthorn's, partner here, the brimstone butterfly? That's because that butterfly and its caterpillar and larvae are native to Europe, where glossy buckthorn originated. And in Europe, it's a lovely symbiotic relationship between in and glossy and common buckthorn. But someone at some point decided, you know what? I'm going to take that European plant and plop it here in North America, and life will be good. Now you might say, well, how about we bring that brimstone butterfly over? We can't necessarily bring that over because then we need to bring the thing in the European ecosystem that eats that butterfly and its larvae because North American birds won't recognize it as food. And I'll point to the example that a lot of us know of as what used to be called the gypsy moth, now the spongy moth caterpillar. It came over to Medford, Massachusetts by a scientist, and he was done with his experiment, and so he just chucked them out. They're native to Europe, but suddenly here in North America, they were like, oh, gee whiz, there's thousands of new leafy green food sources. And actually, you know what? We kind of like these things and they taste better than the stuff we were used to eating. And so they just devour and strip the trees bare of leaves in summers. And it's really damaging to the ecosystem. So let's define then what is an invasive plant. It is basically a plant that did not originate or exist here in North America prior to the arrival of Europeans, and it grows aggressively, displacing native plants. A native plant, on the other hand, is indigenous to North America and existed in America prior to the arrival of Europeans. A native plant cannot be invasive. Now, some are aggressive, fast growers, rapid seed producers, etc. But a native plant cannot be invasive. I was talking to a contractor the other day, and he was saying, "Oh yeah, every time I get on a job site, I rip out all the sumac because that's invasive." And I, stopped him. I said, "Hey, please don't rip out any more sumac at job sites because it is native." And for those of us in the Northeast here, in particular New England and points north and east, most 99% of the sumac you encounter is not poisonous sumac. Now, some of that exists in other areas of North America. And by the way, that's native to North America as well, as I understand it. But the sumac you encounter here in North America is either staghorn sumac or smooth sumac in New England. And I was actually working at a job site a couple summers ago, and some sumac was growing in the corner of the job site, and I actually took it home and planted it in my yard because it was about to get bulldozed over. And so when I planted it in my yard, I planted in a spot where conventional landscaping would have said, oh, you should plant a stewardia tree or a rose of Sharon or a lilac there. All three of those, by the way, are non-native, and at least one of them is being considered for being added to invasive plant lists across North America. But I added this sumac plant there, and wouldn't you know it, about 2 years later, I suddenly noticed these lovely little red caterpillar-like larvae crawling along eating the leaves. Turns out they are the red sawfly larvae, and they pretty much only eat sumac leaves. So I could have been looking at a Rose of Sharon and marveling at its lovely big flowers, or enjoying the lilac in the springtime, but it wouldn't have been doing any good for the ecosystem. Now I have sumac, which, by the way, if you plant sumac around your property, it turns to this awesome neon orange, pink, red color in the fall time. I can't even describe it. It's so awesome and cool to watch change colors. Anyhow, let's move along here. The question then is, how did invasive plants get here? So there's three ways we're going to ID that invasive plants got here. The first is accidental. So Phragmites, common reed, and purple loosestrife, as well as Asian stiltgrass, they all came here accidentally. It's believed that Phragmites and purple loosestrife actually came over at some point in the 1800s or 1700s as actually ballast material in the bottom of ships. So when ships would leave European ports loaded with cargo to come to the New World, they didn't have pumping systems back then that could pump water in and out of the ship and maintain the levelness of the ship. And so they had to shovel dirt into the bottom of the ship from the nearest shore where purple loosestrife and Phragmites were growing. And then when the ships got to harbor, they didn't need the extra weight to balance out the ship. So they dumped the dirt in the North American harbors, and the seeds of these two plants floated to the shoreline and started invading and taking over. And at first, people were like, oh, lovely plant. Oh, look at those purple flowers. They remind me of home back in England where I grew up, or France, or wherever else in Europe. And then suddenly these plants started taking over. And I want to pause on Phragmites here because that one there is one you see, you'll see these everywhere in like wetlandy, swampish kind of drainage ditch areas. Phragmites is a really bad one though, because it just grows and proliferates right through a swamp. And where there should be cattails growing, there's these Phragmites. And if you ever watch the red-winged blackbird. It's one of the first migratory birds to return to the Northeast after wintertime, sometimes arriving as early as March. And it can sit on the very sturdy cattail stems with their kind of poofy top and sit there and be able to eye emerging mosquito larvae or other water bugs emerging, swoop in and out of the cattails and eat them. But it can't sit on these grassy kind of common reed Phragmites because they blow in the wind and they're too flexible and there's not a good solid perch. And on top of it, even if it couldn't fly in and out because if you see in this picture on the left, they just grow so thickly and tightly together that it can't access in and out of the grass stems there. Which, what does that mean? Then there's nothing to eat the mosquitoes that still are happily breeding and developing in there. And suddenly you have a proliferation of mosquitoes in this happy little mosquito tick haven, sanctuary, whatever it is. And so it gets really bad. These invasive plants are more and more being linked to increases in insects that are not so good to have in such large numbers. Purple loosestrife, this one's a bad one too, because one plant can produce, millions of seeds. I believe up to 2 million tiny microscopic seeds that get carried then by bird, animals, wind, water, and then humans. Asian stiltgrass, that's a big one in the mid-Atlantic kind of region and is creeping its way northward into New England. That was originally packing material in the day and age before packing peanuts and styrofoam and that sort of stuff. The next way invasive plants got here is through agricultural and medicinal means. So garlic mustard, that's one that came over in the late 1870s. Some New York City chef was like, oh boy, this will be a great thing to add. I heard about it in Europe when I was studying over there. Let me bring it here and I'll put it on my menu. I'll add it in my salads and put it as garnish on a plate. Well, turns out most people here in America and across the world for that matter, really don't like munching on a leafy green that tastes like you're just chewing on a whole raw clove of garlic. And so it fell out of favor. But by then, the damage was done because the seeds spread and they spread prolifically. And now in New York at that time, people were like, oh, gee, finally we got a green thing that's growing in the cracks and crevices of the streets and in, the alleyways. This is lovely. It grows in shade, it grows in sun. We should use it for erosion control. And then they would put it in, job sites, and some contractor would haul soil from that job site to another job site, and it spread from there. Mugwort on the right hand side here, that's another one that came over through agricultural medicinal means. It's believed it came over first to the Canadian eastern shoreline, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, that area, by Jesuit missionaries in the late 1500s, early 1600s, who would use it as like a tea or like a herbal remedy type plant. And then outside of its European range, they found that this plant just grew and took off. And this one's a real nasty one because if you go and rip it out, you have to rip out the entirety of this long root, and any little fragment of root left in the ground can start a brand new plant. You typically find this growing around like construction sites, the edges of roads, and the leaves have a very spicy kind of aromatic smell to them. But again, both of these plants will then invade woodlands or meadows and basically smother out any chance that native plants have to grow. And I'll stop one more point on garlic mustard here. Garlic mustard is basically an allopath type of plant. And you're like, what the heck's that? It actually means that garlic mustard, through its roots, exudes a chemical that basically alters the soil around it, making it inhospitable for any other kind of plant to grow around it. And so to that end, it's basically slowly expanding its perimeter because it alters the soil so only it can grow. Really, really bad plants. But those other reasons aside, the vast majority of invasive plants got here through landscaping. And you'll hear me say it multiple times through this presentation here. Yesterday's common landscaping plants are today's invasive plants, and today's favorite common landscaping plants are tomorrow's invasive plants. Now, I can't possibly go through every list, and for those on this call who aren't familiar with all the plant lists, this is just a smattering of the plants, just a fraction of the plants on the lists of Massachusetts, Maine, and New Hampshire. But there's hundreds more on those lists and thousands more across all the other states and regions here in North America. It's not just New England. You're talking about the Southeast, the Mid-Atlantic, the Northwest, the Southwest, the Midwest Plains region. Every area is under attack by these plants from outside of North America, that outside of their native zones and areas of control, they just grow prolifically. So we'll start with Tree of Heaven here. This one here originally was introduced in Philadelphia in the 1790s. People wanted a tree that could withstand city traffic and it could withstand, pollution and smog and animals walking by and wouldn't be eaten by those animals walking by. So they found this tree that seemed to grow well in Chinese cities and they planted it here and it just kind of grew and they were marveling at, wow, this thing grows so fast. It's like it's grown to heaven. So they called it Tree of Heaven. I personally call it Tree of Hell, and I'll tell you why in just a little bit. But they were like enamored by like the tropical looking kind of leaf structure it has. And oh, it produces these pretty pink samaras in July, August time frame. How pretty are they? And then they end up blowing off and starting new Tree of Heaven infestation somewhere. But why I call this one Tree of Hell is because unlike most plants, like most trees, you can cut that tree right at the base and it'll pretty much die. This one is like a bad mob in a video game where you kill the mob and all of a sudden, the second you try to kill it, 100 more of that same mob suddenly spawn around and start attacking you. That's what this plant does. You cut down this plant at the wrong time of year without the right herbicide to kill it, you will suddenly have 100 different shoots coming out from each of the roots in all the different directions. And suddenly, where you had one plant, now you have 100 more trees growing, and they grow fast and smother and take over. And you're like, well, Nate, those leaves look very, very similar to sumac. How do you tell the difference? Or black walnut. How do you tell the difference? The difference, you got to use your nose for this one, but if you rip a leaf or you break a stem or scratch the bark, it releases this disgusting, foul, nasty, nasty smell. And interestingly enough, this tree here, I've got a coworker in Beijing, China. Occasionally she'll send me pictures of Beijing, and I saw a tree growing on one of the streets. I'm like, oh, I know what that tree is. It's tree of heaven. It's a problem tree over here. She's like, I don't know what you call it over there, but when we were kids in China, we used to call it stink tree. It smells really awful. And I'm going to pause on this tree a little longer because what's really sad about this tree coming over here is it's actually a primary host for the invasive spotted lanternfly. In China and Asia, they've got a kind of nice symbiotic relationship. But this tree here, it's over here for about 200 something, 300 something years. And then all of a sudden, in the late 1990s, early 2000s, a accidental invasion of spotted lanternfly eggs landed here in like some piles of stones that were imported from Asia. And all of a sudden, these spotted lanternflies were like, hey, we actually recognize this thing, and they took off, and now they're wreaking untold havoc across the ecosystem. Where this plant here, they may very well have died off and not been able to spread. But this is a plant you'll see commonly growing in cities along the side of highways. I can think of I-95 running through Woburn, where it's just all up and down the side of that stretch of highway there. Really, really bad plant. Norway maple is another kind of tree. When you're driving through the city, and here's a Boston reference for some of you on this call. When you're driving through and you see this maple tree growing up in between the triple deckers here in Boston, you're like, oh, gee whiz, I didn't know a sugar maple grew in the city. That's because it doesn't. What you're actually looking at is a Norway maple. And this tree really took off in the early 1800s when Frederick Olmsted, designed the emerald necklace, which is like this area of parks in the back bay of Boston, kind of right along Fenway area. And he wanted a tree that would grow great in the city. So he brought this tree here and it did great. But the problem is it produced seeds or samaras, or as kids call them, helicopters like this that would fall off and grow and spread elsewhere. And the problem with Norway maple is that it grows so thickly together and the leaves are so dense that no sunlight can get down to the bottom of the forest floor once it becomes a forest tree. And so nothing can grow underneath it. Now there are sugar maples, and you're like, hey, how do I tell the difference between the maple trees? So you can easily tell the difference between red swamp maples and silver maples, but sugar maples and Norway maples look similar. But how you tell the difference, if you look at the little red arrows I got on this picture here, right in the center, you will see emanating from the center generally 7 straight lines. That is for sure a Norway maple. Generally, sugar maple only has 5 straight lines. Additionally, the samaras or seeds or helicopters they've got 2 really flat seeds in them, whereas the sugar maples or red maples or silver maples generally have more of a bump to their seeds, almost like a small ball bearing or like the size of a vegetable pea or something like that. But the telltale sign is the milky white sap. If you break a stem off the tree and it bleeds this milky white sap you see there, that is 100% a Norway maple. North American native maples bleed a clear sap. So that's how you tell that. We're going to move to the next one, Asian bittersweet here. This is a really, really gnarly one. A lot of people see it growing everywhere. Yeah, I'm thinking of an area in Connecticut right down I-84 where you look off to the left or the right and the entire woods is just smothered with this bittersweet. And these are just small vines of it. I've seen vines that get up to 6 to 8 inches in diameter, really bad, but they basically grow faster than the trees can grow. Their leaves are so thick that they smother the tree, basically suffocate it to death. And if they can't suffocate the tree to death, then they pull it down, uproot it. And I've seen where they pulled down one tree in the middle of the woods and then jumped to the next tree and started growing up, just one vine. This is in the center is what the leaves look like and the immature berries. But on the right here is the mature berries. And this is why people loved it so much. They're like, well, I can grow this along my fence or I can grow it up a trellis. And oh, look at those beautiful berries. I can make wreaths out of it and think of the crafting opportunities. And I can turn this into a lovely centerpiece for my kitchen table at Thanksgiving. And the birds will eat the berries. What could go? This is wonderful. The problem is, nothing from Asia is here to eat these berries, eat these plants, and keep them in check. And so whenever they land and hit the ground, they just spread and grow prolifically and smother and strangle the ecosystem. Burning bush, we talked about that a little bit earlier. This is what it looks like. The stems have these little paper wings to them. People loved them because they were bright red and they had these really cool red seeds to them after the leaves fell. You could accidentally run a lawnmower over a baby one and it would just grow right back, maybe even stronger than before. You couldn't kill it. Deer and rabbit could eat it. It wouldn't damage it really that much. And people loved them. But the problem is they were the premier tree or shrub, if you will, to plant around lawns, landscaping, hedges, fences, whatever. And then their seeds get blown or spread by the wind into adjacent woods. I can take you down streets in West Methuen, where I live, where the entire forest understory along these streets is nothing but burning bush. And people see the green in the springtime. They're like, oh, wow, it's coming back to life. No, the forest is actually coming back to death. And we'll talk about why I say that in another couple slides. But why are there so many there? Because as West Methuen was developed in the late 1950s into the early 2000s, this was the tree that the shrub, the bush that everyone planted around their houses. And then there was enough of it that they pollinated and cross-pollinated, and the seeds blew into the surrounding woodlands. And this isn't just in Methuen. I see it in Andover. I see it everywhere that I basically work in the Massachusetts, New Hampshire region. And I see on other posts across North America this shrub invading. We'll skip over a couple here. Barberry, I skipped over that. That has actually been specifically linked to increases in tick population for a number of reasons. Honeysuckle shrub, it's believed this one was really one of the premier kind of, ooh, man, I'm a Victorian era socialite. Let me take this cool Asian honeysuckle shrub and plant it over here. And then I can bring all of my socialite friends over to gawk at it. And then their Victorian socialite friends were like, well, I need to find myself a cool Asian plant. Let me go and get one out of China and bring that, and I'll show up my friend. And that's how a lot of these other ones on the list here got brought over here because people were like, ooh, I want a cool plant. I want to have an arboretum of all these random plants. And they kept trying to outdo each other. And then people were like, hey, these are actually cool. Bugs don't eat the leaves. They got these berries that we get to look at, and birds eat them. This is a wonderful thing. This is great. We'll skip over a couple of these. But before I skip from this one here, I want to also add that if you are removing invasive plants, make sure that if you rip out a honeysuckle shrub, you put it on the top of whatever invasive plant brush pile you're building, because any stem or root part of this that touches any bit of soil can reroot and start a brand new plant. Again, because nothing eats it to keep it in check. Multiflora rose, This one here originally came over in the 1860s when the horticultural rose business was really taking off, and they wanted a plant to use for rootstock. It grows really fast roots, very hardy, sturdy roots. And so most of their ornamental Asian roses that they were planting, they wanted to, increase the root growth. And so they found this wild rose growing in China, liked it, and then it started kind of growing by itself at the edge of like some garden or nursery. And they were like, look at those really cool white poofy flowers. This is great. We should have this plant and sell it. And you know what? We can make some good money off of it because it grows fast. Nothing eats it and stuff. Nothing keeps it, down. So we should plant that. And look at these really cool berries, rose hips that hang on until like winter time. They're great for Christmas wreath decorations. And then people were like, this plant grows so fast and so quickly. We should start planting it along the interstate highways that were being built in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on. And then someone somewhere, especially in Ohio, this plant became popular to basically replace fences. Someone's like, well, you know what? Instead of having fences, we can just plant these living fences of non-native plants. You can look up the history of this one, but it was considered to be a living fence plant until suddenly it started growing everywhere. And what's really nasty about this one here, it's got horrible thorns, but in addition, each of these rose hips here has seeds in it. One plant can produce up to 1 million seeds. Each of those seeds has a 20-year viability in the soil, meaning you could be pulling up a tiny little multiflora rose seedling that came from a seed that was dropped back in 2006. Really, really bad plant. Common buckthorn. We talked about that one and glossy buckthorn. I showed you the picture of glossy buckthorn earlier. This is what common buckthorn looks like. The bark on these common buckthorns looks oftentimes very similar to, say, black cherry or some darker birches. The telltale way to tell that it's common buckthorn is by scratching away the bark, and you've got this bright orange inner bark here. Back to Asian bittersweet. If you're starting to tackle vines, the Asian bittersweet vine root itself is this bright metallic orange. Just be careful if you start pulling it, you'll end up having to pull out 15 to 20 feet worth of root because that's about how far it can grow in either direction with root. But these plants here, again, someone thought they'd make a great landscaping plant until they didn't. And then now that they're here, they spread by birds, animals, wind, water, and humans. And you say, well, why does it matter? Because non-native plants grow without their natural checks. The insects, the animals, the birds, the fungus, and microbial pathogens that keep them in check. We talked about garlic mustard. There's only one creature in the world that eats garlic mustard, and that's the garlic mustard weevil that's native to Europe, where garlic mustard originated. It eats the seed heads, basically preventing it from producing seeds. But then you get to America here, North America, and you drop garlic mustard in the ground. There's nothing to eat it because the native creatures here don't want to eat something that tastes like garlic. The North American black cherry, this is actually a fascinating one. It's a reverse invasion. So some of the early colonists in the 1600s thought they loved the tree so much they wanted to bring it back to Europe and use it for like lumber and furniture, wood, and that sort of thing. So they planted it in Europe. They're like, wow, this thing grows better in Europe than it does in North America. And it just started growing and taking off and actually is now an invasive plant in Europe. And for centuries, scientists couldn't figure out why it was so invasive in Europe, but it wasn't so spreading so fast here in North America. Turns out within the North American soil, there is this microbial pathogen that basically kills off 9 out of every 10 black cherry seeds that hits the ground. But that pathogen is largely absent in European soil. So for every 10 black cherry seeds that hit the ground, 10 more black cherry plants grow. These invasive plants then grow and crowd out the native plants, starving the creatures, the native creatures that depend on the leaves and the stems of these plants. So like I said, burning bush creates a monoculture that just replaces where you should have these 5 shrubs growing, and then some. Buckthorn replaces winterberry, summer sweet, native tree saplings. I'm actually working at a property in Andover, Massachusetts right now in my limited spare time, where 99% of the forest understory is buckthorn. And you say, well, it's still a tree, right? It's got to be doing some good sucking down carbon. Okay, maybe it does that like all things do. But the problem is nothing eats this plant, nothing keeps it in check, and it grows so thickly together that the native tree saplings can't grow up so that there's something to suddenly shoot up when a mature tree dies or falls over. And the winterberry plants can't grow and be full of winterberries to provide food for the birds when everything's snowed under. And so that creates more starvation in the ecosystem, and you have this monoculture. Norway maple, I visited Odiorn State Park in southern New Hampshire a couple years ago, and I walked into this area. I'm like, wow, there's nothing growing under here. And I look up, and sure enough, the tree canopy is nothing but mature 60, 70-year-old Norway maples that have blocked out everything. Interestingly enough, Norway maple is native to Europe. I have found only one plant that grows under Norway maple and actually thrives, and that's garlic mustard, which also just happens to be native to Europe as well. So you're starting to see some of these connections here. And I'll say it, and I may very well say it again, any non-native plant can and will become invasive if enough of it is planted. Some plants only need one plant to start just spreading and taking over. Others, like the Bradford Callery pear, need to be planted over 100 years. There's suddenly enough of them, and all of a sudden one has a little genetic mutation where it can suddenly become non-sterile and actually start producing fruit, and then there's nothing to keep that Asian pear tree in check, and it just spreads and smothers the woods and the plains and the forests. It takes over. So why does it matter? Because plants are the foundation. Everything eats a plant. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about a North American ecosystem or an Asian ecosystem or European ecosystem. The entire foundation is based on green plants native to that specific ecosystem. And most insects are plant genus and species, or in some cases, even subspecies specific. So what happens when the entire understory of a forest or an entire, what was a field, reverts back to nature only to be filled with autumn olive or other invasive plants? Suddenly, there's no native green plants for these native insects to eat. And that link or that layer of the food web collapses. And then the birds and the frogs and the snakes and the owls that depend on those collapse and fall even further. And suddenly the whole ecosystem becomes out of balance. And then you say, mountain lion, I didn't know there were any around here. That's the problem. There aren't any mountain lions around here because our ancestors did such a great job of extirpating them back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And now, as the forests have kind of regrown, suddenly you've got a proliferation of deer that have nothing to control them, nothing to eat them. And so they then go and decimate whatever few native plants are left here because that's what they've kind of coexisted around for millennia upon millennia. And so the whole ecosystem suddenly becomes out of whack. And you say, well, I'm not any one of these creatures. It surely doesn't affect me. Let me talk to you about the state bird of Massachusetts, the black-capped chickadee. What a cute little bird that is, huh? I love seeing it at my bird feeder. And incidentally, if you are one of the people who has a bird feeder, try using striped sunflower seeds. You will get far more native birds than if you use the standard cheap seed mix, which really only feeds the non-native invasive European house sparrows. Anyhow, back to the black-capped chickadee. You're reading this right. This bird needs up to 750 native caterpillars a day just to raise their young from hatchlings to adulthood. And where is it going to find those? Well, we know most birds don't have teeth, so they can't chew and grind up leaves. But what can eat leaves is that lovely eight-spotted forester moth we talked about. So this Virginia creeper grows, the eight-spotted forester moth eats the leaves, converts it into energy, protein, fats that this black-capped chickadee then take this caterpillar back to its nest, drop it in its nest, feed its babies, and those babies will then grow up to become tick and mosquito eating machines. And we all know what ticks and mosquitoes eat, humans and their pets, and the invasive rats and mice that humans brought over with us from across the world, and all of the extra deer that are now around because there's nothing to control or keep the deer in check. Now, what happens when this Virginia creeper can't grow because you've got a complete understory of barberry growing, or you've got Asian bittersweet suddenly growing and taking over where this native vine should be growing? Suddenly, the eight-spotted forester moth dies off because there's no green leaves of Virginia creeper for it to eat. And as it dies off, the black-capped chickadee suddenly loses its food source. And so the mother chickadee has to helplessly watch as either her baby starve to death in the nest, or she has to fly further from the nest, desperately trying to find food, increasing her chances of being eaten by something else or something coming into the nest and eating her babies. And what happens when the black-capped chickadee babies die and don't become adults? Suddenly there's nothing to eat the ticks and mosquitoes, but they still have their food source of humans and animals wandering out into the native nature parks and saying, oh, what marvelous nature this is. And they're actually looking at a lie that is the result of hundreds of years of planting and continued planting of non-native plants for landscaping purposes that then just take off. And when I say lie, you're like, Nate, what do you mean the lie? I cleaned up my neighborhood or my yard. When I moved to my yard in West Methuen, I couldn't stand out in my driveway on the main road without getting mobbed by mosquitoes. I went through my swamp that next summer, cleared out all the non-native plants there. I went through my yard, removed all the landscaping plants that were non-native, replaced them with almost majority native plants. Now at 6 p.m. at night on a June evening, I can walk in my swamp and maybe get one mosquito land on me. I can walk through my meadow of goldenrod, and half my lot is actually swamp or meadow, and I can have goldenrod up to my chin and not get one tick on me. Why? There's plenty of deer wandering through my property, but I have anywhere to 5 to 6 native birds at any time of day, any time of year, picking through the leaf litter, the native leaves that are on the ground that they can move and access, flying branch to branch, searching for caterpillars and also eating the ticks and mosquitoes along the way. These are pictures from 2 yards I worked in my neighborhood. After I got done cleaning up the invasives in my yard, I went to my neighbors' yards and started getting their permission to do that. The first yard, if I block out all of the non-natives here, you're looking at 40%, 50% of this picture gone. That means 50% of this green natural area is doing nothing to support the native ecosystem and actually is helping to undo it. It gets even worse if you're a mother chickadee flying around looking for caterpillars for your babies and you fly to this next neighbor's lot. This is what you actually see. This is the same lot, same area, 3 weeks apart after I went through and killed all of the non-native plants that were growing there, which was primarily just 100% monoculture of bittersweet with some occasional buckthorn trees pulled in. Why? Because someone at some point in the past had to take a plant out of Asia or Europe, plop it here in North America so they could be the talk of the town in their landscaping or crafting or whatever it was, all at the expense of the ecosystem. And you might say, well, Nate, I don't have any of these invasives in my yard. But do you have butterfly bush, hydrangea, vinca, or rose of Sharon? Each of these is non-native. They're native to Europe or Asia. Another one I didn't have time to add here or space to add is Japanese maple. And that is like everyone had to have and still has to have that lovely Japanese maple and the exotic bark and the fancy looking leaves and stuff. I have seen all four of these, as well as Japanese maple, spreading freely and unchecked in adjacent woodlands to where these plants were planted. And what you end up seeing is they grow and take over where native plants should be growing. You can, people love vinca because they're like, nothing eats it. And I don't need mulch. I just got this lovely green ground cover until it grows and spreads and smothers out all the spring ephemeral flowers that should be growing in the adjacent woods to support the emerging pollinators in March, April, May timeframe. Hydrangea, people love their hydrangeas. Oh, my grandmother had one. It reminds me of her. Da, 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 this, that. You can watch a hydrangea all summer and maybe see 5 insects land on it just because they needed a place to rest. If you plant some native bee balm, in 5 minutes, you will see more hummingbirds, bees, butterflies, moths, other insect pollinators in 5 minutes than you will if you watched your hydrangea for 5 years straight. Butterfly bush, people are like, oh, but you should see all the butterflies landing on this in September. Again, it's a lie because we actually all know that butterflies need milkweed to produce, but I'm sure there'll be milkweed growing somewhere else. I'm not going to plant milkweed in my yard. And the problem is, the milkweed can't grow anywhere else because it's being smothered and crowded out by all the other invasive plants. And so this monarch butterfly has nothing on which to lay its eggs. It's a great uber concentrated nectar sugar source for this monarch butterfly that's an adult, but there's nothing for its babies to eat. We've, in a sense, created what I call a donut shop. And you're like, Nate, we were here to talk about plants, not donuts. Hear me out, please. I promise you there's a method to my madness here. But basically, think if someone went through your town and replaced every single house, every single grocery store, hospital, store, basically every building with a donut shop. Well, they look nice and cute and quaint and stuff. People love donuts and coffee. Humans are always saying, oh, gee, I can't get enough coffee to make it through the day. I need more coffee to get my morning going. People line up at 5 in the morning to get donuts fresh out of the fryer. But think about this. Can you give coffee to your infant? How long would you survive if all you had to eat and raise your family on was over processed sugars and carbs? What could possibly go wrong, though? Humans love these things, right? The problem is they're great as a snack for adults from time to time, but you can't raise a family in a donut shop on coffee and over processed sugars and carbs. You need the protein, you need the vegetables, you need everything that is not a donut or coffee to really live and survive and exist. But that's what we've done to the ecosystem. Now, at this point, you may be feeling kind of down. You're like, Nate, I wanted to be inspired and educated and engaged and stuff. Hang tight, we'll get there. Trust me. It was humans who created this mess, and now it's up to us as humans to stop this mess. And how do we stop this? Well, the good news is you don't need to be a landscaper for 25 years like Nate asking questions. We've now got the internet in our hand, and you can use this awesome app called Picture This. There's several others out there. I personally like Picture This. And by the way, I'm not getting endorsement pay or anything from them, but Picture This, great, great app. You can click the picture and get an identification on the plant, and you'll know right away if it's native or non-native. And if it's non-native, don't plant it. If you're walking around a garden center or a nursery or whatever, and you see this lovely plant that catches your eye, if it's not native, don't waste your money on it. Don't bring it home because today's invasives were yesterday's landscaping plant, and today's common landscaping plants are tomorrow's invasives, especially if you see a tag that says deer resistant, rabbit resistant, insect resistant, easy to grow. That is for sure. You are holding next year's invasive plants, the invasive plant that's going to be added 5 years, 10 years, 6 years, 50 years down the line. That is the problem with these plants. And don't worry, I'll tell you where you can find native plants, because the answer is you can't find them at Lowe's or Home Depot. They sell 99.9% non-native plants, and most local private plant nurseries are not much better. They might have maybe 5%, 10% native plants. We'll get to where you can find them. And then the next thing you can do is remove non-native plants. Most non-native plants can be pulled from the ground, but you got to pull roots and all. You can't just pull the stem off because it'll just keep growing. Or your force multiplier here is going to be chemical herbicide. I know people are like, oh, gee, Roundup, glyphosate, triclopyr are all bad things. Can't I just use some homemade concoction of vinegar and onion juice and garlic steeped in the whole mix? Only if you want to smell nasty and have these plants keep coming back. If you cut a plant straight at the base, an invasive plant, and paint it instantly with concentrated herbicide, that should do it in, especially if you do that in September through about March. That's the best time of year to do that. The only plant I don't want you to touch, even though it's non-native and invasive, is Japanese knotweed. This is like the unkillable plant. If you got this bamboo-like plant hanging out in your property, don't smother it. Don't try to burn it. Don't bury it. Don't cut it. Don't dig it up. This plant is a bad plant. You want to talk about the baddest of baddest mobs in a video game, the worst of the worst? That's what this one is. The more you cut this plant, the more it grows. If it's not happy in one spot, it can send out rhizomes, or it feels unsafe, 60, 70 feet underground, pop up somewhere else. This plant thrives on Japanese volcanoes, and it can stay covered by ash and lava for 20 plus years and come roaring back to life, growing through pavement, asphalt, cement, wood, tarps. There's only one way to treat this plant. I can't possibly treat all the knotweed across North America, but if you have this plant, reach out to me, please. My contact information will be in this presentation at the last slide, and I can at least give you the steps how to treat this plant during a tiny 3-week window of the year with very diluted glyphosate. And then the next thing you can do is start planting native plants. So for every non-native plant that you will find at Home Depot, Lowe's, or whatever, you can plant a native plant. I don't know why people love salvia so much. Don't plant salvia. Plant blazing star liatris. It's a native plant. And by the way, if you start planting any of these native plants here or others, leave the seed heads up in the fall time. Don't ascribe to the old-fashioned common landscaping knowledge of cutting them all to the ground. Because I ask you, what are the birds supposed to eat when everything's covered in snow and not everyone has a bird feeder out? In the middle of a snowstorm, I got to see a dark-eyed junco picking apart a blazing liatris seed head I left up 2 winters ago in the middle of a snowstorm. Forsythia, everyone loves that plant. Don't plant forsythia. It looks like a hot mess except for 4 days of the year when the stems are covered in yellow flowers. But if you want stems covered in yellow flowers, plant spicebush, which also is the sole food source for this really cool looking spicebush swallowtail butterfly larvae. Really cool once you start seeing those. And spicebush, ironically enough, is one of the few native shrubs that's actually fully deer resistant. Where do you find these? Green Mountain natives, all the way down to Joyful Butterfly. These are native plant nurseries that I've used that ship. None of these nurseries are giving me any sort of kickback or anything for mentioning them on this call. These are just great native plant nurseries that I've had good success with that ship. But obviously, some of us want to go and see the plants and talk to someone. That's where Hummingbird Natives comes in. That's actually West Newbury based. Jess McDonald, I know the owner. She's passionate about native plants. She's got a great heart for ecosystem restoration. And she started her own business a couple years ago. And there's so many others. Probably some people on this call might even have their own native plant nurseries. Please frequent those. Blue Stem Natives down in Norwell. That's another woman-owned local small business here in Massachusetts, native plant nursery. Please support native plant nurseries. They're doing good, and they can continue to do good the more people plant native plants. Bagley Pond and Fassett Farm there in Western New Hampshire. I haven't been to them, so I can't speak to them. But again, this should give you some idea of what you can find. So I want to round out by what you can do. The first thing you can do is stop planting non-native plants. For every non-native plant, there is an equivalent and thousand times more accretive native plant that you can put in the ground. Remove non-native plants. So back to stop planting non-native plants, you won't have as many non-native plants to remove if you stop planting non-native plants. I say this every time someone puts a non-native plant in the ground, it's like hammering another nail in the coffin of the ecosystem. And there's no other way to say it but that bluntly. Use the Picture This app. It'll be a great app for you to ID plants. Start in your own backyard like I did. Get some gloves, get loppers, get hand pruners, get a folding pruning saw, a hand pick, and also get yourself a bottle of herbicide and a long paintbrush. You got to get comfortable with that. That'll be your force multiplier. And then when you get done in your own backyard, maybe you can be as crazy as Nate and start knocking on your neighbor's door and being like, hey, can I go through the woods in your property and take out the invasives? Or you can join an invasive plant group. I'm part of one or two of them. That picture at the beginning of the presentation, that was me on one of the invasive plant removal group day activities we did. It's great. You're learning. You're on a team with a bunch of other people doing the same thing. Do that. You'll feel awesome. And start planting native plants. Each of these native plants down here does 1,000 times more for the ecosystem than any of the non-native plants. I got to pause on the one in the middle there, the purple one. This one's really cool. Don't buy any more of those chrysanthemums and plastic pots that you got to throw out and create more microplastics in the ecosystem. Plant yourself a perennial New England aster. What's really cool, it flowers from September to November. And towards the end of the season, the bees want to get as much nectar as they can. So instead of going back to their nests at night, they actually get in the center of the plant, and as night falls, the petals actually close up and keep it warm overnight. And then when the sun comes out the next morning and it opens up, the bee warms up and it can continue getting nectar and nourishment to survive the winter. False Solomon seal right next to it, that's 1,000 times better to plant than lily of the valley or hosta. You want another semi-deer resistant shrub? Find mountain laurel. Look at those beautiful pink flowers on the left. And then I want to talk about the one on the right here. Those are the leaves of that Virginia creeper plant I kept talking about. And what's really cool is as the season starts to wane and these bugs start going away for the season, the birds still need some food to fly back south to avoid winter. All across the North American continent, Virginia creeper berries and poison ivy berries start ripening, and they're filled with the waxy, fatty lipids that these birds need for calorie-dense fruit to make it all the way back south. And, with that, I want to ask each of you from this call here to please think about what you can do this coming spring. We can flip the script on this. We can redefine what is beautiful landscaping when we learn to appreciate and learn to love the natives. You can do this. We can do this together. Together, we can do this. And with that, I want to thank you all for your time. I know we went a few minutes over, but as Nancy and Carol said, I am willing to stick around for a few extra minutes and take questions. So thank you all very much for participating, for listening to this blonde guy in his basement yak on about plants. I really appreciate your time and attention.
Thank you, Nate. That was amazing and so much new information and just the history of how the plants got here and
I
how
don't
we
know if
got.
you can see it, Nate. There's just lots of hand clapping going on, lots of hearts.
Thank
So
you.
it's filling the screen. It's
It
fabulous.
is my pleasure. It is my friggin' pleasure to talk about this stuff. I love talking about this and inspiring others to do good in the world around them.
So Nate, I think there is a lot of interest on learning on how to control different plants. And so I don't know
Yes.
if you want to just maybe do a kind of more generic grouping
Sure.
of like invasive shrubs, for example, or bittersweet
Yeah.
vines, or like, like
Yeah.
grouping them together and how to control it both with herbicides and without.
Yeah. So thank you for asking that question. So we'll start with like the ones that are non-woody. So if you talk about like garlic mustard, that one is actually really easy to pull out of the ground. You know you got it because if you crush the leaves, it smells like garlic, and you can very easily pull things like that out of the ground. Vinca, that one there is a little more pain in the butt to pull out of the ground because you really got to like get your hands underneath it. Those ones there you really can't use herbicide for. Phragmites and Japanese knotweed, those are the two that you actually need to spray with herbicide to really get them. Phragmites can grow roots about 10 feet down into the swampy, mucky soil. So those ones there you need to use herbicides for. For the woody stemmed ones, like bittersweet, like autumn olive, like glossy and common buckthorn, if you're crazy like me, you can buy a tool. There's a great company called the Uprooter out of Oregon where you can get this tool that's basically like a weed wrench. And if you want to go herbicide free, I did that on my neighbor's yard. And you put it around the base of the plant. As long as the plant itself is not more than like 2 inches thick, you can clamp onto the base of it and yank the plant out of the ground roots and all. It's really a fun tool to use. That's if you want to go herbicide free. You can cut the plant down, but again, kind of like when you cut your finger, there's like an infection that can set in, and then you get sepsis, and then that kills you or whatever. The problem is the fungus and pathogens that would kill off some of these plants if they get a cut or get just like sheared off at the base without herbicide. Those fungus and pathogens and bacteria don't exist here in North America. And so if you cut it off at the base, there's still tons of sugars and carbohydrates and energy just trapped in the roots that are going to grow up. So you're going to have to cut year over year. Eventually, most plants, except knotweed, you cut them enough times at the base, they will die, but you're talking about a multi-year type of thing. Someone like me who has limited time between being a husband and a dad and a full-time working HR guy, my time's limited, so I want to maximize what I can do. So I will go to any of these woody stemmed invasives. And if I can't rip them out of the ground, I will then cut them at the base and I will paint with herbicide. That Ailanthus tree of heaven, that's a tricky one because in September timeframe is really your start of a window from September to about November, where you can hack it with an axe at a 45-degree angle just around the base every inch or so. And then that one there, you have to paint with herbicide because that will then kill the roots. You got to, usually the best time to apply painted on herbicide is late summer into winter, February, early March timeframe, because that's when the plants are sending everything down into the roots where the herbicide kills and gets a free ride down into the roots. Then once you're assured that that tree of heaven plant has died off, then the next year you can cut it down and figure out what you want to plant in its place. But again, the majority of woody stemmed invasive plants like that cut and paint with herbicide. That's going to be your best and fastest way to take care of the problem.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I think there's a couple more comments we'll pick out. One note I want to mention is that there is new research from Cornell University that pulling garlic mustard actually prolongs the control. There is a natural cycle feedback loop, negative feedback loop. Garlic mustard, when it gets to a certain age, will actually start controlling itself and they will start declining. If you keep pulling it, it will keep growing. So check out that research. I'll put it in
Yeah.
the chat. Um,
Yeah. I have seen that, Nancy, and I haven't done enough digging into that and trying it in an area, so I can't speak to that, but I have seen that research. And it's interesting you say that because there's an area where I've been pulling garlic mustard, where I pulled garlic mustard 3 years ago, and you would think it would have died off by now. There's no seeds or no plants anywhere producing seeds. And yet every single year that same spot still has garlic mustard coming up. But again, you hate to sit there and watch this plant when you're like, that spot could be doing so much good. But again, to prevent that sort of moral conundrum, just don't plant a non-native plant in the first place. If whoever planted that 150 years ago hadn't planted it, we wouldn't be talking about it today.
So there's a couple of plants. I think they talked about kind of the vinca plants that are escaping
Yeah.
into forest. You mentioned that too.
Yes.
English ivy is another one, a
Oh,
plant that
yes.
is that, it covers so much of the surface, whether that's soil or do you have any tips on how to start controlling it?
So English ivy, I've battled with that in a couple different ways. If it's a really small infestation, you can kind of spray it with an herbicide. I sprayed some in an area where I was spraying Japanese knotweed in my neighborhood 2 summers ago, and it died off, didn't come back. Last summer, I found an area where there was English ivy growing. And really, the only way, and it is backbreaking work, it actually gave me kind of like temporary carpal tunnel for a couple weeks afterwards. But I had to basically take a hand pick and hack into the edge of it and basically pull it back like a carpet. That I wasn't about to start spraying herbicide in mass through this wooded area. So that was my way to control it. Really, the only way that I've seen in all of the work I've done and research I've done, if you've got English ivy, I really feel badly for you, but that's what you need to do. You basically need to basically take a garden fork or a hand pick and rip it out of the ground that way. And you're going to have to keep revisiting the spot for a couple years. If you see it growing up a tree, you can generally just cut it at the base and paint that cut with herbicide because it will strangle trees, it'll smother trees, but that is a bad one. I wish I had better advice for you on that.
Yeah. And can you t talk a little bit about painting herbicides for those that's not familiar? I know, like, I do get Brush Be Gone or Ivy Off, from the stores,
Yeah,
and you can also spray those things, but talk about kind of painting and then also
sure.
safety to make sure that you don't expose yourself to, herbicides.
Exactly. Exactly. So obviously any sort of chemical, I mean, even the plastics we're around all day have chemicals in them. And, I don't want to get down any sort of conspiracy kind of rabbit hole type things here. But with herbicide, and I should have had them, they're on the other side of my basement. I found these really long paint brushes on Amazon. They're about like an inch wide. And all I basically do is I've got a container of herbicide that I carry in a little bag with all of my other hand tools, saws and axes and pruners. And I will have this paintbrush in the herbicide bottle. And as soon as I cut the plant, you don't want to like cut the plants and then come back 8 hours later because they'll start to like basically the equivalent of a scab over to like protect themselves. As soon as you slice the plant off or behead the plant or whatever at as flat as you can to the ground. You take the paintbrush and you paint the cut stump. Now, if you've got a fairly large one, the best spot to paint on a plant is right around the edge of the stump. And the reason for that is you're getting the herbicide into the phloem. So a lot of plants will send their nutrients up through the center of the plant, and then they'll take whatever they gather in from the leaves and send it down through the phloem on the outer bark of the plant to get down into the roots. So if you take the paintbrush and you just paint it on I do that. Other people will take the herbicide and put it into a kind of dabber bottle and dab it that way. Some people will even put blue dye in so they know, oh yeah, I hit that stump because they see the blue dye. You can do whatever works for you, but that's how you would use that. What I do is I am usually covered head to toe in long sleeves, long pants, and I got arm guards to help me not get poison ivy because I will walk right into poison ivy and rip out the invasive plants growing in the poison ivy to, believe it or not, save the poison ivy. I also have on my kind of hand gloves, but underneath those, I have basically kind of like latex gloves or vinyl gloves or nitrile gloves like they use in doctors' offices. And I always make sure that I wear safety glasses. I have horrible luck with my eyes, so wear safety glasses. So if something splashes or dirt sprays up into your eyes, you've got that element of protection. Obviously, if you're spraying like knotweed, I get myself a kind of like cheap kind of Tyvek suit or hazmat suit on Amazon, and I wear goggles and boots to basically protect myself. And wear a face mask as well. That's the best way if you're spraying. And obviously, be aware of which way the wind's blowing because you don't want to spray into the wind and have it come back at you or drift into some desirable plants, which is again, if you use that paintbrush method, you can really target exactly what you want to hit when you want to hit it.
Yeah. And then there was a question about just kind of more information on herbicides in general. One
Yeah.
thing I just want to remind everyone that, and if you can explain the difference between the different types of herbicides, the active ingredients, but most of the herbicides that you can find at the box stores are meant to be used in lawns and upland areas and only
Hmm.
can be applied by a landowner on their own property. In
Yeah,
Massachusetts, if you apply herbicide on property that's not yours, even if it's your workplace, you need to be a licensed applicator.
this is
And if
true.
you apply herbicides in anywhere near a wetland, so like knotweed, sometimes buckthorn and plants that grow near water, you need to actually mix chemicals yourself by a licensed applicator because it's actually better for the environment. That there's stuff that's in, that's just, yeah, it's
Yes.
approved for wetland use. So if you
Yeah.
can talk about the difference between like Roundup and glyphosate and like triple
Yeah.
core and um,
Yeah.
what the store brands would
Yeah.
mostly be.
Yeah, so if you go to any store, you're gonna see Roundup. Most of the Roundup that you see in like a Home Depot or a Lowe's is tricloper. You really won't find glyphosate. There's I kind of say that nothing kills like glyphosate kills. Glyphosate is, really a very powerful plant, but we know it's been linked, plant killer, but we know it's been linked to other kind of dangerous diseases and medical conditions. So you have to be very, very careful with that. Tricloper does a pretty good job. Now, some people, and I myself have even found that Asian bittersweet seems to respond better to tricloper than glyphosate. So sometimes you need to bring both bottles, or you need to have someone licensed carefully mix up a cocktail. But again, I am not telling you to go out and start your own business without a license here. I'm not a lawyer. I don't purport to know every single law that's out there. So you need to be very, very careful when using this, especially when you're, like Nancy said, near wetlands. If you are on someone else's property, not your own property, you need to be very careful. Massachusetts, New Hampshire, many other states have very strict licensing laws and insurance requirements for herbicide applicators.
Um, Carol, do you have any comments that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, well, the one is Nate was referring to it, and we have something that our library just obtained, and that's called an extractigator.
Yes.
which is it is so effective. I've used it for getting rid of like the Morrow's honeysuckle, the honeysuckles that Nate was talking about. You get rid of the Morrow's honeysuckle, it's amazing the invasives that, or excuse me, the natives that will come up in its
Yes.
place. But if you don't know what we're talking about, just Google the extractigator. It's very good
Hmm.
for removing these unwanted plants and pulling them up by the roots. I've even used it
Yes.
on multiflora rose that is not a huge multiflora rose, or I've already cut it back and then been able to extract the rest of the plant from the ground. So
Mm.
um,
Yeah,
that's a
that I was going to say, Carol, the uprooter plant, that uprooter tool that
yes,
I use that in my neighbor's half acre of woods, and I was able to clear basically a half acre of buckthorn over one winter. And it works even when the ground is frozen, just because of the, physics of a lever and the wrench grip of it. So,
yeah.
like she said, look up Extractigator. There's other variations out there. Very, very useful, helpful tool, especially if you want to do this without herbicide.
Yeah. So a couple of kind of comments about our competing invasives.
Yes.
One of the attendees read that wild ginger, I'm assuming the native
Hmm.
wild ginger, may be a plan to help stop the spread of lesser celandine. It's definitely
Yeah.
something to worth trying. So
Yeah.
plants that
Wow.
outcompete. Have you heard of that?
So I've heard of it from time to time. You will stumble across some plants that can just hold their own. Like goldenrod is a great native plant, and it can oftentimes hold its own against a lot of non-native and invasive plants. Um, but again, there are so many hundreds and thousands of invasive plants from all over the world here in North America now that are just completely upending the ecosystem, that you can't plant the whole continent in wild ginger, of course the native wild ginger. And eventually, it would be lovely if we could completely find a way to not need some sort of chemical herbicide, or not even have to go out there and yank a plant out of the ground. But at the end of the day, it is going to require good old fashioned elbow grease in most cases. I mean, I would obviously recommend you plant something like common violet or native wild ginger for a ground cover instead of vinca. Or lesser celandine, oftentimes known as buttercup. But again, a lot of times the more effective method is to get rid of them by removing them or killing them off
Yeah.
chemically.
It is a good idea when you have some success removing invasives to plant more aggressive natives so that the
Yes.
invasives don't re-invade. And the Wild Seed Project in Maine has a really great booklet on which species are aggressive enough to outcompete um, the invasives by different soil types and habitats. So that's a really great one. I
Yeah.
find like plants like Canadian windflower and Mayflower or Mayapple are really great at even
Yes.
ferns. Ferns are really great at
Ferns are really
outcompeting
good.
some, you
Yes.
know,
Yeah,
because
ferns
yeah, you
will
don't
take
want
a
bare soil because you'll get invasives back if you have bare soil.
Yeah, one grass that I found, I actually love it. I got a whole kind of hill area that borders a side street of mine. And one grass that I found that grows really well and it looks really cool in the late summer. It's called purple love grass. It's a great
Oh yeah.
native grass that grows in very dry, kind of sandy areas where not much else will grow. It's got these lovely kind of purple hued grass stems, and it has these really cool, almost like tumbleweed seed things that blow off. And then, you know, of course, they create food, ground food for the ground feeding junco birds and other creatures. Really great plant. I love that. Virginia rose, if you're trying to avoid planting rugosa rose, Virginia rose is another great one to look up. And I've actually seen that growing in drier areas. I've got an area in my yard right on my side street where it gets hit with plows and salt and sand, and it comes back year over year. And there's really not much in the way of invasive stuff that's growing in there. That's another kind of really hardy one to grow.
Yeah, that provides a lot of color, and they actually like both wet and sandy soils. So,
Yes, yeah, very versatile. And they're native, which is just makes it all the better.
The other plant somebody had mentioned is the Pachyra aurora, the golden ragwort, which is a
Yes.
terrific ground cover. And if you're not familiar with it, it has these gorgeous yellow blooms in the spring that just fade away, and then you're just left with these beautiful leaves. So another really wonderful, and somebody had mentioned it might be good for, I don't know if anything's good for getting rid of that celandine, but that's a
Yeah,
tough
no,
one.
the only success I've had with celandine is pulling it out of the ground, using the sharp point of my hand pick, putting it at the base, and then just ripping it out. I was thinking of another really good one, especially if you've got a dry kind of open area, especially like at the top of a hill or whatever, is bearberry. That one seems
Mhm.
to grow really well in very harsh conditions, dry conditions for sure.
Yeah. Well, I
yeah,
think we've got all the questions, Nancy.
I think we got most of them. There's some comments, about people's dealing with different species and kind of their conditions. And I think, um, understanding the soils and as Nate was mentioning, knowing your soils and kind of the site history helps you pick native plants that will do well there
Yes.
so that they can outcompete. And I put the Wild Seed Project book, that resource in the chat, but this webinar is being recorded, including the question and answer session. And it'll take me a day or two to get it uploaded to our YouTube channel. And then we will share that on our website. We'll send that over to the library, and Corinne will send out the recording link as well as a bunch of different resources. We'll include some resources following up on the questions you guys asked, and we'll send those out to you. And Carol, I guess a question for you. We had, I think, originally talked about this won't help everyone, but maybe having a invasive workshop, working day, just to help people kind of get an idea of how to control different type of species and get their hands kind of involved so that they can learn and take it back to their region, their town, their backyard. Are we still trying to schedule
Absolutely.
that?
Yeah, we
Okay.
will. Yeah, and we will get that, and have some hands-on looking at some of these invasives. So absolutely, Nancy, we
Okay.
will do that.
So check our website. I think we were originally thinking March because spring
Yeah.
thaw is a wonderful time to be removing invasives, especially woody invasives, because the roots come out super
Yes.
easy. But we'll have to wait for the snow to melt. So, but check our website. It'll probably be in March or April for that.
That's right.
I don't see any other questions. Carol, did we miss any?
No, I think we got everything. This was good.
Okay.
Nate, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for all of your knowledge and sharing it with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to everyone who joined this call. Thank you for your time, your attention, your great questions. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, everyone who's on this call.
Yeah, and you're getting lots of hearts and applause as well.
Yes.
Believe me, they're going right back at each of you guys. Hearts and love and applause to each of you for caring enough to join this call and caring enough to do something.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And yeah, look out for
Thank
the
you.
email and check out our website. I'll stop the
Wonderful.
recording. Hold on. How do I stop the recording?